Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Wolverine.com podcast here on our YouTube channel. If you're watching the premiere on Monday night, we're here every Monday night at 6 p.m. Pre-recorded episode this week. So we will discuss some maybe breaking news isn't the best way to put it. A couple basketball items to hit on. Want to kind of get into the overview of this roster now. We're going to do that over the next several weeks. And today we're going to start with the one that's most interesting to a lot of people. The quarterback situation. We'll discuss all five of those scholarship guys, where we see them factoring in short-term, long-term, things like that. Then we will take a couple questions at the end of the show. But Clayton, welcome on in, my friend.
Great to be here. Yeah, let's get into it.
All right. Well, before we do get into the news segment of the show, I want to talk to you guys about the Wolverine.com's 2024 Michigan football preview. With over 160 action-packed pages, this is a must-have for every Wolverine fan. Every edition has special features you won't find anywhere else. We've got the season preview, position-by-position looks at the roster, feature articles, evaluations of the departing recruiting class. Everyone's kind of put their own little spin on a lot in this thing, and we're talked about last time we were around here how we're kind of rounding third base on that. This is really more of a cleanup week for us, getting a few last items in, and then it gets sent off to the printer and then hopefully in your mailboxes in the next month or so. So head on over to the WolverineOnDemand.com. You can save $5 with free shipping on the pre-orders before the 17th. So you have 1 week from today to get in on that. Users over at the Wolverine.com, our subscribers, I should say, can save $10. You're going to want to head over to the Fort to get your info on that. But yeah, excited about that. It's been a fun few weeks of getting all that put together and kind of a deep dive on what this team will look like. So the WolverineOnDemand.com, get your copy of that today. Also want to let you guys know that we are running a promo here for our viewers on the video edition of our podcast only. You can get in for $1 for your first 2 months of access over at the Wolverine.com using that promo code UM1. So head over there. If you're not subscribed yet, new subscribers, you're going to get 2 months of access for only $1. It is what Clayton Safey continues to call the best deal in America. So the Wolverine.com, use that promo code UM1 today. All right, Clayton, well, I want to hit on a few breaking news or a few recent news items before we get into our main segment. Revolving around Michigan basketball with the news today. A couple notable developments over the last week or so. The biggest one, an update from our Thursday show, Jameer Watkins from Florida State is returning to Florida State, which I think some of us kind of felt like that's where it would be headed. Michigan still does have that one scholarship spot available, but Watkins returning to Florida State will not be an option for this team. And it kind of feels like we have what this team will look like going into the summer. So we don't really need to rehash, the whole, what are your thoughts on the roster? But, this is why you leave a spot open, right? Just in case one of those guys come and they did, and he didn't. So that's where we're at there. Any thoughts on the Jameer Watkins thing? And I mean, do you have any lingering concerns about this roster heading into the summer?
Yeah, first I apologize for my brief intro. I was sending a text as you called on me there earlier, but yeah, I mean it's kind of one of those things. I feel like you said it. Dusty May, they kind of held back one scholarship, and maybe it would have gone to somebody had they had somebody that in mind or more mutual interest early on in this offseason. But they had this one scholarship. It was worth kind of kicking the tires there. It was reported that Jameer Watkins was planning to visit Michigan and St. John's, as we talked about on Thursday's show, but then it felt like quickly after that it was like, all right, well, when's the visit? It's supposed to be this week. And then obviously it's announced that he's coming back to Florida State. So don't know the exact situation. Was it leverage for NIL? I think probably everything these days is, and might not even be necessarily a bad thing. But yeah, I think Michigan is fine. Florida State is looking at being probably a bad team again, even though they have Jameer Watkins. But regardless, I don't blame a guy for staying at his school that he's already at. He's trying to boost his stock as he heads into the NBA draft next year after being kind of a fringe, maybe drafted, maybe not guy this past season. So yeah, I mean, if something pops up late in the cycle, then I think you go for it. If you're Michigan, it's kind of funny. I think a lot of Michigan fans, when they saw that Dan Hurley was interviewing for the Los Angeles Lakers job, they thought, okay, maybe Liam McNeely, you could circle back there on the 5-star prospect here in 2024 that signed with UConn, is probably on campus right now. But just before we started recording this here, about within the last hour or so, Dan Hurley is staying at UConn. So the transfer portal will not open up for 30 days for UConn players. So, yeah, I mean, the options are clearly going to be limited at this time of year. But I feel like, as you said, I mean, Michigan's in a pretty good spot with the roster, and they still have a spot to play with if something, happens down the line here where somebody gets out of a letter of intent, or, there's a guy that was maybe going to go to the G League or something like that, decides to come to college. Again, not a ton of options out there, but if something does come up, Michigan has a little bit of flexibility. And I think, as Dusty May said last week, they're fine with banking this scholarship to next year too, if it comes to that.
More news on the Michigan basketball front. It was on Monday, a couple hours before we jumped on here. Michigan will play I don't know if a home and home series is the way to describe it with Wake Forest, but this November 10th, happy birthday to me, they will play the Demon Deacons in Greensboro, North Carolina, with the report being on the other side of that the two teams will meet in Detroit next year. Interesting that the non-conference schedule is starting to shake out a little bit here. We'll get some more news throughout the summer of what the rest of it will look like, but now you've got this series with Wake Forest. You're going to go to Fort Myers for the Fort Myers tip-off on the week of Thanksgiving, I believe it is, with South Carolina, Virginia Tech, and Xavier. You'll play Arkansas in the Jimmy V Classic, which I know that's going to be a lot of fun to watch. Michigan versus Calipari, Dusty May versus Jaden Davis. There's a lot of storylines there. That'll be a good one on December 11th. And the Jumpman Invitational. You'll play Oklahoma this year in Charlotte, North Carolina. So take shape a little bit here, Clayton. What do you make of the Wake Forest series, and just what you think about how this sort of slate of games is starting to materialize here?
Yeah, Michigan playing 2 games this coming year in North Carolina, with the Jumpman Invitational being out there, and then this game as well. So yeah, I mean, it's kind of one of those things, like, you wish they would maybe have gone to Wake Forest and then hosted Wake Forest next year. But like you said, it's kind of a home and home. It's a close to home and close to home, because Winston-Salem is 30 miles away from Greensboro. Michigan's campus just over 40 miles away from Little Caesars Arena in downtown Detroit. So you get that. I think part of it has to do with your resume. And it is easier to win as well if you're the team going to Greensboro from Michigan and you play at Wake Forest. It's easier to win that game than it would have been if they would have played at Wake Forest gym. And the net rankings, you get a quad 1 win if either team is within the top 50 as opposed to the top 30 if you're the home team, or 75 if you're the road team. So it kind of is the way it goes. It seems like in college basketball, I think a lot of us fans would prefer those games being played at the home arenas. But yeah, I mean, it should be a pretty competitive schedule for Michigan in the non-conference. I think what people are waiting on, though, is that one marquee home game in the non-conference. And maybe Michigan won't have that, and maybe those will be fewer and far between as time moves on here with the new look landscape of college sports with the conferences, because you do have a lot of travel for these teams like Oregon and UCLA, those types of teams coming into the Midwest quite a bit. So maybe teams won't be as willing to go super far in the non-conference. And if you're Michigan, like, you may not want another challenging game on your schedule, because you're going to have a really tough Big Ten with all these different teams in there as well. And Michigan's draw is not the easiest either with the Big Ten, schedule breakdown. So yeah, should be kind of interesting. Michigan, Wake Forest only played once in history back in 2000. Wake Forest has the win. So Michigan could go, get the series lead here if they win the next 2.
Yeah, I like testing this team early on. I know there's going to be some chemistry stuff that needs to be worked out, but with the idea that this could be a team that maybe gets back to not just making the NCAA tournament, but getting back to the runs that we're accustomed to from the last decade or so, playing those tougher games early on, I think, is good. Now, you don't want to lose all of them. That certainly is not a hole that you want to fall down like some of the last few years' teams. But, I've always liked that non-conference game in Detroit. I like that it's going to be against a little higher caliber of an opponent, but it's one of the few times we get to go watch games and sit courtside. So that's pretty neat. I'll be looking forward to that in 2025. But this year so far, it looks like they'll have a slate early on that will test them. And obviously, like you said, we'll have a Big Ten slate that will test them throughout the year. Well, okay, I want to move into let's move into football now. Our main segment for the day. Throughout the summer, we are going to kind of camp out in a one position group, maybe two position groups at a time. Today, we'll have the quarterback discussion, kind of just run through the guys that are in the room. We've done versions of this in the past, but this is kind of going to be a little more how they fit in the short term, where they might fit in the long term, and things of that variety. So, Michigan's quarterback room is comprised of 5 scholarship passers. You've got a graduate in Jack Tuttle, senior Davis Warren, juniors in Alex Orji, Jaden Denegal, and a freshman in Jaden Davis. So I guess let's start with, typically I would go from oldest to youngest, but really the most buzzworthy guy has been Alex Orji. And throughout this offseason, it's felt like they're kind of grooming him, at least publicly, to sort of be that guy. Or I shouldn't even say that. He's the one that's been most visible. I think he's the one that has the most sort of maybe tantalizing skill set, if you want to put it that way. So, I want to start with him. Alex Orji in both, he's intriguing because it's not just a one-year flyer. If he winds up starting this season, he does have, the 2 years of eligibility left. So this could be your starting quarterback into 2025 if things hit the right way, or he could just be a stopgap to Jaden Davis, who we talk about in a little bit. But, I don't know. I don't quite know where to start with him. The thing I'll say with Alex Orji is that, again, everything that I don't want to say needed to see, but everything was on display for him when we got that glimpse of him in the spring game. He went 13 for 18 for 108 yards, had 5 rushes for 19 yards and a touchdown. Right now, his running ability is going to be the calling card, but this is a guy that I think, we just need to see him. They just need to see him pass the ball more, because I don't think you get the evaluation of what he is or what he can bring to the table until he has that type of volume, which he hasn't had to this point. Now, there are people that are concerned with his accuracy. He barely completed more than 50% of his passes in high school. And there's a lot of debate as to whether that is a trait or it's something that's just inherent. It's something that can be trained. I think a lot of with him comes down to his mechanics, and there's a lot to sort of process here with him. But let's just maybe look at the short term outlook with Alex Orji heading into this camp. I don't know if it's what do you need to see from him, but how does this guy win this job? Is it simply the promise of what he could be? Is it the ability to execute the offense? Is it just simply the running ability, and they'll deal with everything else? Where do you see him kind of fitting into this quarterback situation as, the guy that we think is the favorite to have this job?
Yeah, I mean, one, he actually has 3 years of eligibility remaining too, so he could be your quarterback for the next 3 years as he enters his redshirt sophomore year, which is kind of, something that's exciting a little bit, the fact that he's in the mix right now. And, he's not necessarily the type of player, at least right now, that the NFL is completely looking for. So if it does work out this year with Alex Orji, you're looking at a potential long-term play here. And, one, I think I love the mindset he has. I know we talked about it after, he talked at Will Johnson's camp a week and a half ago, but I mean, he just has kind of the makings between the ears of, really just what you would expect out of a Michigan future captain at some point, a leader on Michigan's team, talking about how he, necessarily isn't here to be a starter. Like, he committed to the University of Michigan to be on the team and to be a leader and, to help the team win in any way that he can, not just be the starter. Now, doesn't mean he's not trying to go out and win the job. And yeah, I think he's right there in terms of how I would handicap it. I think that it's going to come down to fall camp. I wonder if it goes into the season, which wouldn't necessarily be the best thing because you do have some tough games early on. But yeah, I mean, I think that he is somebody that does at least one thing very well, and that's running the football. And clearly you can do things off of that. And it's not like he can't pass at all. We just haven't seen him do that in games much yet. He's only attempted 1 pass in his career. So that's the part that I think is a concern a little bit. But you look at it, and I think the reason why he has a good chance is because he has that running element to him. You can build an offense around him. It'll look a lot different than it would if you had somebody else behind center like Jack Tuttle or Davis Warren, who we'll talk about in a second. But there's kind of something there. So it's intriguing. Some good, some bad in the spring game. And the second thing is, as we talked about after the spring game, we didn't get to see his full skill set on display because he wasn't live. And when he's live, I think that suits him better than when he's not live, which doesn't go for most quarterbacks, but it's certainly the case with him. So, he's a guy that I think you could have a successful offense around. I just don't know enough about how he is as a passer to be definite on, what my expectations are for him.
Yeah, I think part of it too is you need him to, all progression's not linear. Like, yes, there's a leadership void to fill without JJ McCarthy there, but at the same time, you need to tailor your offense around the best version of all of your players. So to me, it's not that, well, JJ completed X amount of passes, so that's the level that Alex Orji needs to get to. I mean, I think for him, I think they just need him to progress to a point where he's good enough to add a dimension where, they do have to respect his talent throwing the ball. And I think he has arm talent. I mean, when you watch him throw the ball in warmups, I mean, the guy can rip it. Can throw a pigskin a quarter mile, quote Uncle Rico. It's just one of those things where, we saw kind of the good or the good and the bad of it in the spring game. Like when he's on time, when the ball's where it's supposed to be, like it looks functional. It looks like it's something they can build around. But I think his mechanics are still just a little bit sloppy. Obviously, the QB run game was never really a threat with JJ McCarthy, as much as we wanted them to add that dimension to their offense. And I think there is something to, maybe leaving a little bit of potential with him on the table in that regard. But, with Alex Orji, I mean, it's going to be, I think you will see some true QB runs built into the offense. It has to be if he's out there, even if he's not the starting quarterback. I mean, that's going to be his bread and butter. But, for me, it's all about getting him to a point where Michigan is tough to defend. And, being that he does have a different skill set from some of the guys that they've started back there, I just think it's, how do you use his skill set to make a defense think maybe just even a split second longer or think a little bit differently? Because, that moment of hesitation that, depending on what your play call could be, that's what opens things up. That could open up a whole world of possibilities for them. So, again, I think that it's intriguing. Like he could get to a level where he could be their quarterback the next 2 years, potentially the next 3 years. I mean, who's to say? But at this point, we're going to have to see a lot for him to get to that point. Because I do think a guy like Jaden Davis, who again, we'll save him for last as a freshman. But I do think that he is probably your quarterback of the future, at least right now. I mean, we'll see what happens come next year if they dip into the portal, and obviously Carter Smith will be coming in and all that. But Alex Orji, to me, I mean, like I said, when it went right for him in the spring game, I mean, you could see what the vision is, and it could be open up a world of opportunity for him to rack up some running yards, for Donovan Edwards, Khalil Mullings to rack up some rushing yards. I think that they're built to have an efficient passing game over the middle of the field, which could be a nice little safety valve thing for him. But yeah, I mean, that's it for me. It's less about getting him to complete 65% of his passes and more about how do they get him to a point where he does enough to where defenses have to respect it.
Yeah, and it's tough to say exactly too, because I thought that, some of the passes he completed were, just shorter passes, a lot of stuff. I thought the tight ends were really involved, especially when, really when any quarterback was in the game. I know they, there were a couple deep shots, and one of them to Kendrick Bell from Davis Warren, but that was, against, it was a great play, but, it was against a lot of walk-on defensive backs. So again, it's like, do we just don't know what he is throwing down the field? He did make, I thought, a poor decision. I think double or triple coverage. You can tell he's working on his footwork, although, he seemed to bail out of the pocket a couple times a little bit early. So it's still just not there and polished yet. And I think the game experience could help that. Like if they decide that this is the guy and you roll with him, Alabama kind of did that last year with Jalen Milroe, a guy who people make a lot of comparisons to with Orji, including Jim Harbaugh. And Alex Orji said he watched Jalen Milroe throughout the season as well and tried to kind of emulate him a little bit. I will say Milroe seems to have a little bit more of a natural throwing motion than Orji. So, like Orji is a little bit different in terms of how he throws it. But again, game experience could help him if they can kind of build an offense around him running the football, and then he can make the passes he needs to make. Like you said, I mean, that would be pretty tough to defend, and he's durable too. I think that's why they didn't run JJ as much, is because, I mean, it seemed like every time he took a pretty big hit, he was kind of limping around, and obviously he got hurt late in the year and almost cost them, and he was able to get healthy enough for the Ohio State game. But Alex Orji is a guy that's durable. Obviously he hasn't had a big sample size, but you can see it. He doesn't take the big hits. He's delivering a lot of them. So that's it. If he's in the game, they're going to be running the football quite a bit with him and other guys too.
And the one thing I'll say, just because, from an overarching perspective with all these guys, is that I think it does help from a development perspective that, one, you're not only going up against a Michigan defense every day that has the talent on it that it does, but I mean, Sharon Moore and Kirk Campbell are telling Wake Martindale, throw the kitchen sink at these guys. Like, they need to see everything. And if it comes with struggles early on, so be it. But I think that's a benefit to them. I mean, certainly a benefit to guys like Davis, guys like Orji, who could be here for a few years. But I really think that's a bit of a, it's kind of a sink or swim aspect to that as well. Any thoughts on Orji?
No, and I think he'll probably enter the conversation with some of these other guys too when you talk about setup and if they were to win a job, that sort of thing. So,
all right, well, let's move on to Jack Tuttle. A lot of people go to college for 7 years. Typically, they're doctors or lawyers. He happens to be a college football quarterback, and he's interesting to me because now, again, I know that had trouble getting on the field at Indiana and. Was the backup quarterback last year, but this is still a guy who was a former 4-star recruit. And, you think about how much better maybe some of the skill talent might be at Michigan. Certainly, I think the offensive line play may be better, even with this year where you flip all 5 guys. Probably the best line, 2 of the best lines he's ever played behind in the last few years. And, with the extra season of eligibility, it seemed like he was always going to be back some way, whether it was as a grad assistant or as a quarterback, but he is still with the team. Didn't really do much in the spring. He was limited with that injury, but he's in the mix for this gig. I know that the spring game was Alex Orji and Davis Warren, but people will still tell you they expect Tuttle to not only be in the mix. I know there are people that think he winds up being the guy too, but for me, when you look at what his season looked like last year, I mean, he showed some good mobility, a solid grasp of the offense that they're trying to run, and again. The caveat with that was mopping up in a lot of games because Michigan didn't play a competitive game until November 11th last year. But, to me, I think the biggest question with him is, do we already know what he is? If Michigan likes that Alex Orji brings a dual threat aspect to their offense, but also that a guy like Davis Warren brings the execution, the experience inside the system. Maybe Tuttle's a bit of both of those guys. And he's someone that should not be ruled out of this. I think that there is a chance that he does win this job. I don't think I don't want to say I don't think he comes back to Michigan if he doesn't think he has that chance, but they're going to give him a crack at this thing. And I think that there are some things to like here. And I know that they see him as kind of a coach in the room as well. So thoughts on Jack Tuttle?
Yeah, I mean, I think he might be the favorite. And, like you said, I mean, he missed spring ball, so that kind of held him back. I do wonder what this conversation would look like surrounding Michigan's quarterback if he was available in the spring and he wasn't recovering from, I believe, a procedure he had. So, I mean, it would be quite a bit different, I think, just because we would have seen more of him. He was pretty good in the spring game last year. Like you said, mop-up duty during the season was pretty good as well. It's kind of hard to tell and judge from a lot of that. I think that he is pretty mobile. He can clearly make the simple plays, and maybe that's all you need out of him. Now, a big question with this offense is how good is the run game going to be with the running backs? You have a completely different offensive line. You have no Blake Corum back there. Donovan Edwards and Kalel Mullings are going to have to step up and prove they can do it on a down-to-down basis, on a week-to-week basis. I think they can. Jordan Marshall might be sprinkled in. Benjamin Hall could be back there as well, but we just don't know what this run game is going to look like. If it's really good or pretty good, I think there's a chance that Jack Tuttle and some sprinkles of Alex Orji, some Orji sprinkles. I don't know. People take that and run with it.
That's a phrase.
Yeah, that is a phrase. I don't know how that'll be used at some point, but People will probably take that and run with it. But then I think this offense might be pretty good. Like if he doesn't turn the football over, and again, he can make the simple plays, then I think he could be a productive quarterback for this offense, and you still use Alex Orji situationally. I think the one thing you worry about Tuttle with is, can this offense be dynamic with Jack Tuttle as a quarterback? And I have some stats. I wrote about this before spring ball, but he has completed 59.8% of his passes, 1,031 yards, 6 touchdowns, 6 interceptions in his career. He's attempted 199 passes, so it's not a super small sample size compared to the other quarterbacks on Michigan's roster. It's a very large sample size. We also have this sample size: 58 passes he's thrown of the past 10 yards beyond the line of scrimmage. He's 17 of 58, which is only 29.3%. So that is very low. Now, there are many different variables when you factor this in. A lot of his time has been in garbage time. A lot of his time has been at Indiana when Michael Penix or somebody else was hurt. He had to start a game, and you don't have the weapons around you. So it's really hard to judge that number. I just know it's a low number, and it's one that is somewhat alarming as you look at it. So in terms of what he has to prove, it's alarming because he has to prove that he can push the ball downfield. Michigan's offense can create big plays through the air with him behind center. If they can't, then maybe you do just go with the guy who's the better athlete, because they both can run, but Alex Orji can run a lot better and, is, again, more durable. We saw Jack Tuttle get banged up when he ran right into the kicker's net on was that the UNLV sideline, I think, or East Carolina, one of the first couple games. So
all those games are
there. Right. So yeah, I don't even remember at this point, but like, if that's going to continue to be a concern for him, and again, fall camp's going to be huge, then maybe you do go with Alex Orji. But if he can make some of those plays down the field, Jack Tuttle could be, a very solid quarterback for this team.
A little optimism for you here. A little storyline we can workshop. Did Michigan fix Jack Tuttle? 15 of 17, 130 yards and a touchdown. No sacks last year. 90.9 QBR. So again, limited opportunities, but if you want to spin gold out of that, that's up to you. I don't have any other thoughts on Jack Tuttle. I think it's pretty clear he's going to factor into this. It's interesting given that he is a seventh-year guy, and despite Alex Orji being in your quarterback competition, I think in a lot of ways he might be the biggest unknown of anyone when you look at what he could actually be and how he factors in. So ready to move on to Davis Warren?
Let's do it.
All right, Davis Warren. For me, that guy is, when you look through this roster and outside of the obvious guys, the Will Johnsons of the world, the Mason Grahams, what have you, I think you'd be hard-pressed to find a better story on the roster. I mean, he's more than just a former walk-on who grinded for his opportunity and had to wait. He probably should have been, in different set of circumstances, would have been recruited out of high school, but dealt with cancer his junior year, beat that, comes back for his senior year. That gets wiped out due to COVID. So he really came to Michigan as one of the, I don't want to overstate it, but one of the better kept secrets in the country. And what we saw was that he worked himself into a scholarship role. He was J.J. McCarthy's primary backup after Cade McNamara got hurt in 2022. Last year fell behind Jack Tuttle in the pecking order, but a bit of a rebirth for him. I'll put that in quotation marks. A bit of a rebirth, given that everyone's kind of starting from the same spot when McCarthy leaves, and there's a quarterback battle to duke out on the field. But yeah, I thought we saw him have a really good spring game. He was 6-9, 136 yards, 2 touchdowns. Talk about guys that run the offense and just make the throws and do what they're asked to do. I think that Kirk Campbell trusts him as one of those guys, and I think that I don't know where to place him with Alex Orji and Jack Tuttle, but all I can say is that I think he's going to be right there. And the one time that we saw these guys somewhat live over the last few months, he was the best quarterback on the field. So thoughts on Davis Warren?
Yeah, well, one reason why Jack Tuttle's stats that you listed might be a little deceiving is because Davis Warren's last year was 0 for 5 with an interception. And he's better than that. And that was garbage time, against 2s and 3s and with 2s and 3s, which is, another caveat in and of itself. But he's clearly better than that. And in the pick he threw, again, now I'm thinking that was UNLV. The pick that he threw in that game, I don't blame him for. He was not supposed to go in the game at that point. It was supposed to be Jaden Denegal, but Mike Hart accidentally put in the wrong quarterback, and he goes
and he
out
heard
there.
about it too.
Yeah, and Jim Harbaugh, made that clear. And I think part of why Jim Harbaugh made that clear is because he was defending Davis Warren a little bit. It's hard to go in when you didn't think you were going to play that game, or at least you thought you were after Denegal. Next thing you know, you got your helmet on and you're making the call back there. So just wanted to point that out when you look at his stat line. You're right. I mean, I thought he was the best quarterback during the spring game, at least throwing the football. I think Alex Orji did some things athletically and, again, was limited by the format of the game. But, Davis Warren, I thought, looked pretty good. The concerns to me with him are his athleticism, his size at 6'2", 195. And, does he have the biggest arm? Accuracy seems pretty good. Again, it's small sample size. You don't know. And, how's he going to process the information and go through the reads? All that sort of stuff are things that you have to question with any quarterback we haven't seen play a significant amount of time. But I mean, he feels like a somebody that you really like to have in that room, somebody that you could call upon if you needed to. And I think, the way I remember it, he passed up Alan Bowman a couple years ago on the depth chart as JJ's primary backup. Alan Bowman goes in last year at Oklahoma State and is the starter on a team that made the Big 12 championship game. So it's not like Davis Warren doesn't have any talent. He clearly does, and I think he's a guy that you would trust back there. So maybe he will be the guy that wins the job. I just think that in the end, he's going to get edged out by one of the two guys like Jack Tuttle and Alex Orji because of their mobility compared to him. And, because if he's not really good or at least like quite a bit better than them throwing the football, then you probably have to go with another differentiator, which is the legs. And, I think he gets edged out there by Tuttle and Orji, but he's a guy that you can't rule out either for the starting job, which is why fall camp is kind of nerve-wracking if you're a Michigan fan. But for us covering it, it's pretty exciting because you're going in and I think everybody has a shot out of these three that we've talked about.
Yeah, I think you make a great point there. All things being equal, if it comes down to they all sort of execute the offense about the same, and even if a guy like Davis Warren executes it maybe just a little bit better, I think the legs of the other two guys, if he, I think the biggest key for him, he's going to have to show some mobility in fall camp to really stake his claim for the job. Now, again, I thought he played really well in the spring game when we saw him, but again, a couple of those were, the deep ball to what was it? Kendrick Bell was about as good as you can throw it.
Into the wind too. Yeah.
Into the wind. Yeah. It was very windy, not the best weather day. The touchdown to Fred Moore was more kind of Fred doing his thing and making something out of it. But I think there's something to be said about just running the offense. And that's why I think that's why Cade McNamara did as well as he did. He just did what he was asked to do. And I think that's enough, that's a big, with these three guys, because this will be, they'll say, oh, Jaden Davis is competing, Jaden Denegal is competing. These are the three guys that are going to really, I think, have the best shot and really be given the most opportunities to win this job. So, really, you don't set the bar at JJ McCarthy, who's arguably the best quarterback in terms of talent, in terms of the ability to get the job done that Michigan's ever had. You gotta move the bar a little bit. Can any of these guys be for this offense what Cade McNamara was? And I think there's a chance they can be. Like, I'll be optimistic about that. So we'll see. It will sort itself out on the field. Want to move to Jaden Denegal now, who, again, I think there's, choose my words carefully out of respect for the player, I think there's a pretty clear next tier from those top three that we just talked about in Jaden Denegal. Now, you see this kid get off the bus or walk on the field in football pads. I mean, he looks like what you want a quarterback to look like. 6'5", 235, almost kind of a prototype in that regard. And Kirk Campbell has been a very loud advocate for him as well. Like, we talked to him at the Rose Bowl. He's either the Rose Bowl or the national title game. He had mentioned that Denegal was maybe the most improved player in their room last season behind the scenes, but it was not good in the spring game. In fact, it was pretty bad. And that could have just been a bad day at the office. And by all accounts, he had a little better of a spring than maybe we saw on the field. But, 3 years in, I think you get a pretty good sense of what a guy is and what they can be. And, I mean, he's just all over the place. The accuracy isn't quite there. The mechanics were all over the place. We thought that maybe he had a chance to step up and be sort of a Wilton Spate type of guy. But like I said, everything that we've seen and heard kind of suggests that it's kind of those three guys. And then you talk about Jaden Denegal. So it's going to take probably a big surge for him this summer to get in the, I don't want to say good graces. I don't think he's in the doghouse or anything, but just haven't quite seen it from him. Despite, I think, at times on the field last year, got a few decent looks at him and he looked all right. But again, the caveats of level of competition and state of game are also apply there as well.
Yeah, and level of competition in the spring game probably even lower given the split squads. And I will say I do think Kirk Campbell, talking to him after the spring game, was pretty surprised by the way Jaden Denegal played. So I think you're right when you say that, he played better throughout the entirety of spring, but that was a big opportunity for those guys. And, he didn't play the way he needed to. He threw an interception. He could have thrown 2 or 3 more. One was dropped by Jeremiah Beasley. So look, I think there clearly is a next tier, as you put it. And that's, shown by the way they use those guys in the spring game. It was kind of Orji, Davis Warren, and then Jaden Davis and Jaden Denegal came in, but then the other 2 guys came back in and pretty much played the rest of the game. So, they clearly, have drawn that line, it seems like, and they wanted to see more of the other 2 guys, Orji and Jack Tuttle, than Jaden Davis and Jaden Denegal. So a lot of Jadens, by the way, on this team. A lot of different spellings for the word Jaden. We got Jaden McBurrows, with the apostrophe, J-A''DEN. We got Jaden Denegal. We got Jaden Davis, different spelling. So it's tough to keep it straight. But
hold on. I mean, can we park there for a second? I think we have 4 different spellings of Jaden. So it's the Jadyn for Jaden Davis. We have Jaden Mangum now, who's Jaden.
Forgot about Mangum.
Jayden for Jaden Denegal, and Jaden McBurrows, the J''DEN. So how about that for a fun fact?
Jaden is the new Jalen, I think. And Jalen Rose made that, or whoever named him, his grandma or mom or whoever he attributes it to, made that name famous. But now Jaden is taking over. Also, the NBA has a ton of Jaden, so it's kind of the popular name right now. But yeah, I mean, going back to Denegal as a player, it's kind of funny too, because I think he does have a pretty big arm. Like you said, he's got that stature that, kind of reminds you a little bit of Wilton Spate. And if somebody could be Wilton Spate 2016 version before the injuries and before whatever happened in 2017, even before his final injury that ended his year, then I think that would be a huge win for Michigan, because you can win with that level of quarterback play, with a great defense, with a good run game around you. And Michigan has proven that. So, away from that tangent, I was rewatching the Nebraska game a couple weeks ago, and I just love the touchdown pass he had to Peyton O'Leary, that he zipped in there into a pretty tight window. It was just wobbling. He's got the photo we have on the screen right now. He's using the laces, but the way he throws the ball, I feel like he just kind of grips it and rips it. It didn't work so well in the spring game. It was a little wobbly pass on the Peyton O'Leary touchdown, although he caught it. It was a bullet. But that's just another tangent, I guess, on Jaden Denegal's game. Don't know necessarily what to make of him. I wouldn't say that, he's got no shot in the rest of his career or anything like that. I just think right now there's a clear separation between the top 3 guys on the depth chart and Jaden Denegal, and he's got some work to do.
Yeah, I have nothing else to add on him. I think we pretty well summed it up there. Let's move to probably a guy where, if anything, not that I'm putting this energy out in the world, but if anything at some point this year goes south, where let's just say this team is 5-3 or 6-3 or something, heading down the stretch, this is probably the guy that we'll hear the most about. this next fellow. And that's a true freshman in Jaden Davis, who I think, by all accounts, it seems like everything points to him getting a redshirt year. That's the expectation. I don't think that anyone really disagrees with that. And again, not to rehash the discourse about him from the recruiting trail on each end of the spectrum, but On3 Industry Ranking has him as a 4-star signee, number 106th player in the country, 8th ranked quarterback, and that seems about right. I think I haven't seen a ton of the other quarterbacks, but I know at one point he was considered a fringe 5-star guy. I don't think anyone has really argued that much, but when you look at him as a player, um, and again, I think that he's not really even in the discussion this year, unless you do turn to looking towards the future down the stretch, which I don't even think that's really going to happen, because in November you've got games against Oregon, you've got that game against Ohio State. I don't think we're going to get to a point this year, and again, knocking on wood here, where the breaking case of emergency seal comes off like it did for Brandon Peters late in that 2017 season. I think they're going to be very deliberate with his development. I think they're willing to take the time with him. Looks like he has the tools to be a good to very good power 4 starter to me. I thought that, we didn't get a ton of looks at him in the spring game, a lot of handoffs, but there was a play along the sideline on 4th down. I believe this is also to Peyton O'Leary the ball was placed exactly where it needed to be, and Jair Hill makes a great play. That's maybe the highlight for him from this off season. But, I think for him, you look at Jaden Davis, I don't think the clock starts on wanting to see what he can do until maybe spring ball next year. I think the emphasis for him is going to be continuing to fill out physically, develop in the weight room with Justin Tress, get those, what we talked earlier about, those valuable reps against a Wink Martindale, aggressive NFL style of defense. And I think that's going to be what helps him the most, because he can be absolutely terrible all year, at least to start the year. But you want to see, those benchmarks of that development behind the scenes. He's probably going to be pretty prominently featured, on the scout team, and giving those guys a look for what they'll see week to week. They're not going to rush him along. I think it said this a little bit earlier, but unless they bring in a portal quarterback in 2025, I think that he's probably potentially in the mix to start next year. Maybe he's in a competition with Alex Orji. Maybe he's in a competition with Alex Orji and Davis Warren, or maybe even Jaden Denegal figures it out. But, when you look at the highest ceilings and floors of any of the guys in the room, I think from a traits perspective, he's kind of a mishmash of all of those guys. But he's not, I'll put it this way, he's not a pro at the prom. He's not a guy that you're going to insert into the lineup and say, hey, go win us a Big Ten championship, go win us a college football playoff game. They're going to be very deliberate about his development.
Yeah, it seems like they're patient, and he's willing to be patient, which I think is good. And he knew JJ McCarthy and knows him well, and that helped throughout the recruiting process. And JJ McCarthy, he did earn a role, his freshman year, but he's a different type of player. He earned the role. A lot of, the reason why he did was because of his mobility and his athleticism. Jaden Davis is just a different type of player. So, I think he understands that not being the starter your freshman year does not rule out you having a great career and becoming a very high NFL draft pick. So I think he's got the right mindset in that regard. Kirk Campbell said after the spring game that he was the only quarterback out of those 5 that didn't get first team snaps. They're being a little bit more patient. And, I wouldn't be surprised if that changes in fall camp. It was his first spring. He was an early enrollee. Who knows if he could get in the mix for the starting job this year. I wouldn't bet on that, but it seems like he's, kind of willing to wait his turn at this point. He spins the ball really well. I think that's pretty clear. From the way Sharon Moore and Kirk Campbell have talked about him, and the way he grasps information is really good. Like, he's a guy that you have to tell something to one time and he will get it after that, which is a really important trait for a quarterback, because you got to make a lot of decisions. You got to make a lot of adjustments on the fly. And if you're a guy that has to be told things a million different times, then it's probably not going to work out so well when the coaches aren't around you and you're the guy calling the shots on the field in a loud environment at Penn State or something like that. So I think that's a really nice trait that Jaden Davis has in his bag. And you pointed to the play that I was going to point out as well. I mean, I thought that was, it was an incompletion. And by the way, I think Jair Hill got there a little early on that play. But regardless, it was a good play by Jair Hill at corner.
Do you remember you calling for the flag?
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was a great play, and Jair Hill is going to be a playmaker, but he was slightly early. I'm glad they didn't call it in a spring game. I thought there were some questionable calls as Donovan Edwards was, giving Sharon a little bit of grief for on the Fox interview after the game, talking about terrible calls. But, I'm glad they didn't call it. But regardless, we were able to see the decision-making from Jaden Davis on that play, and it was really good. We were able to see him roll out of the pocket really well, stay under control, kept his eyes downfield. Like, those are things that John O'Corn didn't pick up, keeping your eyes downfield as you're scrambling. Like, guys that played a lot of college football, guys that started games, never understood that trait. So, yeah, small sample size, but I like what I've seen so far. We got to watch him a little bit at practice before the Rose Bowl and national championship game as well. So we've got a little bit of insight on him, but excited for his future, man. I think he could have a really bright one.
Any other thoughts on quarterbacks? I think we pretty well combed it over.
Yeah, I think I'm good.
All right.
Yeah, we broke it down, man. That was pretty good.
All right. Well, we will do that with all of the position groups throughout this summer. So whether it be on a Monday show, whether we sprinkle into a Thursday show, we'll see what happens. But we will do this with all position groups. So, yeah, good stuff. We'll move on to running backs at some point in the near future. I want to close out this show today with a couple questions that we got both on Twitter and the message board. We'll start with one from the board. This is and goes back to quarterbacks. Maybe you should have just transitioned right into this. But he says, can Alex Orji run the option? If he's skilled enough to turn upfield and eventually pitch it to Edwards in space, that could be a pretty imposing dilemma for the defense to handle. And I think absolutely. I think that goes back to the question or the discussion we had earlier about the different sort of things you can add to defend. I think if Alex Orji's out there, it would be, don't get me wrong, I have a lot of love in my heart for Kurt Campbell and Sharon Moore, but if you're not incorporating the option game into what he does on the field, I think that's borderline malpractice, really. Yeah,
and I think they will for sure. And option doesn't have to always be the pitch either, the traditional triple option or speed option. I think a read option is going to be a staple in this offense. Especially if it's Alex Orji and or Jack Tuttle taking a lot of the snaps back there. So yeah, I think he could. I think we'll probably see an option. They ran some option with the pitch, even with Cade McNamara back there. So it was not a staple, but there were a couple times that they used it. And I think you definitely bring it out if it's Alex Orji. And remember last year going into it as well when Michigan played Nebraska and they had to they shut them down, but they had to prepare at least for a lot of option with Heinrich Harburg back there. So I think you want your quarterback to be a lot better than Heinrich Harburg was last year, but there are some different plays you can run if you have a guy like Orji back there. But certainly a lot of design runs. I think I don't know how many rushing yards I would project he has if he starts the whole year, but would you be shocked if he got to 800, 1,000, something like that, if he's the full-time starter the whole year?
No, I don't think I'd be. And I want to amend my previous statement. I don't want to cast my judgment, my uneducated opinion on the Michigan offense. But when this video game comes out, oh my gosh, a little over a month from now, you will see me run the option with Alex Orji. And we will smash, is all I'll say.
He's going to be awesome to play with. I can't wait.
I can't wait. Let's go to our guy Sasquatch 616, also from the message board. I like this one a lot. He says football is coming off an undefeated national championship season, while basketball is coming off one of the worst seasons in recent memory. Both underwent coaching changes in the offseason. Which team will be viewed nationally as having had a more successful year at the end of their respective seasons? And I'll start with this one. I think it'll probably be Michigan basketball just because they have so much more of a climb to get out of where they were. And, if they, let's just say that they do get to the NCAA tournament, make a second weekend. This team won 8 games last year, like that'll be a huge step up for them. So to me, I mean, I think that the biggest leap one of those programs can take is the basketball program. And to be frank, and I'm not, again, not putting negative energy into the world, really, after you go 15-0 and win a national title, the only place to go kind of is backwards, even if you go, you only lose one game. So to me, I think just going
18-0 or 17-0, whatever it is.
That's true. That would be the one thing that could upstage them. Can you win more than 15 games? That would be the bar there. So
you can now.
You can do that. So I just want to just from a probability standpoint, I think that it will be basketball, but it could be interesting too, because if they go out and say they go 11-1 in the regular season under Sharon Moore, I think that's going to be better than what anyone expected. And then you have those discussions about, sustaining what they did the last few years well into the future. So it's not cut and dry, but I do think it is basketball.
Yeah, I think it's basketball too, because of this fact that this is how college sports runs, where the media or, even the coaches poll, they're involved in it too. So they can't, completely blame everything on the media there. They set these expectations for teams. Like they have these preseason polls. And then if you don't live up to the expectations that other people set for you, then, you're a disappointment, right? Or the coach of the year, David Braun gets coach of the year last year because no one had any expectations for Northwestern coming into what was, going to be a terrible year, a mess of a program. Pat Fitzgerald got fired in the summer because of the hazing stuff, but he wins Big Ten coach of the year because they made a bowl game, overachieved. Doesn't mean he was the best coach in the Big Ten. Clearly not, right? Maybe he will be one day, but he overachieved relative to the expectations that outsiders set on him. So that would be my one gripe with how this all works, even though I'm part of the big bad media. So, but yeah, I think it'd be basketball because the expectations are lower and they have a chance to really overachieve here, because I do think they're going to be a pretty darn good team. I think Michigan football is going to be pretty darn good as well, but I think that's a little bit more expected. And like you said, coming off the national championship, it won't feel as impressive.
It's going to be nice to, I think, have two competently run and competitive programs in football and men's basketball, because I get tired. I'll be honest. I get a little tired of, oh, well, we're a football school anyways. Or, oh, well, I guess we're a basketball school now. Like, por qué no los dos? Why not both? Those Spanish.
Michigan's always been both. It's always football's king, but Michigan has had that upside with, Florida's kind of similar, but even them, haven't had the success in either sport as much as Michigan recently since the late 2000s there. Like Michigan's been both, and I think they can get back to that with Dusty May, and if Sharon Moore can continue what has been built here, what he has helped build here as well. It's going to be fun if it works out for both.
All right, last one here. This is from a Twitter user, from Jesse at 78 grams, and it's everyone's favorite discussion. Is a mostly new coaching staff, including a first-time head coach, or NIL, the main reason Michigan has struggled on the recruiting trail? And I would say you're probably going to get a little more of an informed, not that we're not informed, but definitely tune into our recruiting show on Tuesday and Wednesday nights. Those guys do a wonderful job of breaking it all down. I think that when you look at, is it a first-time head coach? Is it NIL? I really think that, whether it feels like a cop-out or not to say this, I think it's a little bit of both. Sharon Moore was there are some things that bring continuity with having Sharon Moore running the program, but obviously, you'd have to flip the entire defensive staff, your defensive coordinators from the NFL. You had guys from a lot of different places. You really do sort of start at ground zero with a lot of these guys. It wasn't just as simple putting Lamar Morgan on Steve Clinkscale's list of recruits, and all of a sudden it just, it's seamless, right? Like, there are relationships that need to be built. And as we're recording this today, Michigan lands another commit in the edge rusher, Jalen Williams. Is that correct? Is that his name?
Yep. Not Jaden, but Jalen. So chalk one up for the Jalens. They're back.
Jalen's on the board on this episode. I wasn't sure if it was Jalen or Jaden, but so getting a little momentum there. Again, I know that it's not quite where people want it to be yet. And I know that NIL has been a bit of, if you want to say lacking, fine. I think things are getting better incrementally, but not as quickly as maybe some would hope. But really, I think it's a number of things. I don't think it has anything to do with one specific area. But when you make that big a shift, I mean, yes, Sherrone Moore's been with Michigan football, but you just lost one of the best head coaches at any level of the sport, and there's a cost that comes with that. So again, I mean, you want to position yourself well, set a foundation for this next era of the program, but it takes time too. You can't easy bake recruiting momentum. You got to put the work in, and they have been of late.
To me, it's easily pay for play, and I'll call it pay for play, not NIL, because that's what's going on when you look at it from a recruiting standpoint. But Michigan wasn't pulling in top 5 classes the last couple of years of Jim Harbaugh's era either. I think a lot of the quote unquote struggles, because they're still recruiting at a high level relative to most of the competition. But a lot of the struggles started once NIL became their pay for play became such a prominent thing with recruiting, with other teams throwing out a lot of money for different recruits. So to me, they finished 15th in the country last year with their class. They finished 18th the year before. That's not exactly how you would expect a national champion / Big Ten champion to recruit, and we have proof that Michigan has recruited better under Jim Harbaugh than that, even when the results weren't there. So something, to me, a different variable came into play, and that was pay for play. That's happening now. Of course, some of it last cycle, started this cycle, has to do with having a new coaching staff. I completely agree. But if you're looking for the main reason, in my opinion, I think it's pay for play. And we'll see if Michigan engages in it a little bit more, for one, in the meantime, before revenue sharing comes in, and we'll see how they structure that as well once it comes into play.
Yeah, I think it was it a survey from the On3 Elite Series that they did a couple weeks ago, where I think the blue chip guys of the 41 that were polled or something like that, I don't want to misrepresent what the number was, but I think most guys are looking for a little under $500,000 to sign with a school. And all I'll say is that I could see why there'd be a hesitation to do that. I'm not saying it's the right way to do business. I'm not saying it's the wrong way. I think that for every Texas A&M, Miami, Auburn there is out there, there is an Ole Miss and a Texas and Oregon and an Ohio State that is finding a way to do it well. But yeah, I mean, at the same time, like, I can't really say I argue with the, acting with conviction with quote unquote their guys, because those are the type of guys that did kind of help turn this thing around. But you don't get where they got without a JJ McCarthy, without a Donovan Edwards, without some of those blue chip guys. So it has to be. Yeah, I'll be honest. I'm not educated enough about the recruiting process and the philosophies of this new staff yet to speak knowledgeably on what that approach is. But I do think there is some frustration, and there are changes that need to take place. So any other thoughts on that before we close up shop here?
I don't think so. Great show.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. It kind of feel well-versed and well educated on all these guys right now, given that we are coming off and rounding up production on the football preview, which again, all the info for that is in the description below. Head over to the WolverineOnDemand.com. Again, best deal in America. Be sure to use that promo code UM1 for 2 months of access to our site for $1 special offer for our video and podcast listeners only. It's $1 for 2 months using that promo code UM1. Also in the description below. Be sure to like and subscribe. Thank you guys for all of your support of our channel, support of our content. Be sure to head on over to the Wolverine.com for a ton of great stuff from the recruiting trail, the Jalen Williams recruitment fallout. Seems like there could be more on the way. You're going to want to watch those recruiting guys on both Tuesday and Wednesday night on our channel here. So for Clayton Safey, for producer Megan behind the scenes, I'm Anthony Broom. Thank you so much for watching, and we will talk to you again soon.